what do you really want to do for the next 10 years? And I say, I wish it was just wisdom that allowed me to say I wanted to do both innovation and intelligence, but it was actually indecisiveness. I couldn't decide which passion I had. I wanted to pursue more in innovation and entrepreneurship or artificial intelligence. I was finishing my education on data science and artificial intelligence at the time. So looking back, it was really, I think, good that I couldn't decide. I think it's kind of fun to do both. So my charge here was to give everyone a quick overview of artificial intelligence in medicine, where we are now, where we're headed, and perhaps a few words about startups and looking at your own organization about artificial intelligence. So I usually start off with just a sort of what I call an AI scale of the audience. So how many, and I see a few familiar faces here, so how many people here would have no issue riding an autonomous driven vehicle? Interesting, Silicon Valley would have expected more hands. How about an autonomous flying vehicle? Even less. This is less than the plastic surgery group I just talked to this week. How about having a robotic surgery that's without human intervention? Okay, all right. So a little bit not sure about artificial intelligence, which is so ironic. We're epicenter of AI here. So as you probably have heard about in other sectors outside of medicine, in finance, does anyone know the sort of the milestone that was reached this past year in using AI in trading stocks? The machine-derived recommendations have surpassed human brokers making decisions for the first time. So in other words, your stock portfolios, your retirement portfolios are actually run by machine intelligence now. Even in sports, this is World Cup soccer. And even in sports, it's not unusual. Since Moneyball came out a couple of decades ago, it is not unusual for a professional team to have not just one data scientist, but a team of data scientists in figuring out how to strategize about scoring. So the world has adopted analytics and AI in a big way. So on my way here at the airport, Harvard Business Review, which is usually a good bellwether for hot topics in society, is now really focused on not just AI, but how data creates a competitive advantage. Another issue is now focused on how do you learn from data. So a lot of emphasis on data and AI. So I went from my comfort zone of being a pediatric cardiologist in the clinic about 10 years ago, going back to school. I've always liked data and artificial intelligence and talked about a supercomputer that can do a lot more than what humans are capable of doing. Since the 1990s, it's just that nothing was available. And I'll discuss that in a minute. So I went back to school right after the supercomputer Watson beat the human contestants on Jeopardy. And I thought, since it was February 14th, the cardiologist's favorite holiday, I thought the planets were aligned that night, for me, that I needed to go back to school and just go into the world of data science and artificial intelligence. I had just, I think, I teach by statistics, but it was totally a wake-up call that the world has changed in that area. So this was on my way to give a talk in Chicago, and at the airport I couldn't help but, people say, well, how do you relate to the current state of AI without going into all the AI jargon? It's sort of like AI has schizophrenia right now. So this is what I call status quo, and this is AI. So technology that, probably a little safer in this situation. And it was just interesting that it was juxtaposed like that in the restroom. So without making people feel kind of creepy, I kind of stood in the corner and just see what, a typical crowd would do. What would you guess people did in this scenario? It's like right next to each other. Use them both. I like that. Start off with AI and do a little status quo. The first 9 people I saw used a paper towel. Even though, by studies, the air dryer is supposed to be safer, better, faster. Nobody was really using it. And it's because of our comfort zone, right? You don't want to be out of your comfort zone. So I know some of you have seen this before, but what I consider a big opportunity for us, we talked about some of these topics today, You can throw innovation on there too. Precision medicine, population health, medical education, all these really big paradigms have to be disrupted for us to really do well in delivering all of these in the next couple of decades. So we've done okay with evidence-based medicine, but I think we reached a plateau. In order to make up that big information and data gap, we really need to, I think, bring in what I call intelligence-based medicine, going underneath the surface of what's published and really, really bring about precision medicine as we like to see. Why all of a sudden AI has become such an important resource for us. By the way, I think it's a once-in-a-generation transformative potential AI is. That is, and I think we really have to thank a lot of our technology gurus for that. So the three elements that came together roughly around the same time, one is the development of very sophisticated algorithms out of Toronto and Stanford, the ImageNet with Jan LeCun and Jeff Hinton, as well as Li Feifei here at Stanford, really pushed the image recognition algorithms forward and deep learning as well. Just to give you an idea how recent deep learning is, even though you hear, how many people have actually heard and know what the significance of deep learning is here? Okay, still relatively few. So let me just quickly go over that. So deep learning is a more sophisticated version of machine learning that incorporates how the human brain works just as a general concept. So deep learning is, again, sort of the advanced machine learning techniques. The second element that was very important is cloud storage and for data as well as AI. So AI can actually be done in the cloud now fairly routinely. And third is, thanks to our gaming industry, the development of GPUs rather than just relying on CPUs. So GPUs being much faster, looking at data. So the sort of the trio of developments here really launched the recent AI and enthusiasm. And for healthcare, also the availability of data. So you may or may not know this, but a couple of factoids about healthcare data. About 80 to 90% of healthcare data are unstructured, so not very friendly for analytics. And also 80 to 90% of healthcare data was synthesized in the last 5 years or so from the imaging pool of data. So a lot of interesting nuances about healthcare data that's different than other sectors in our society. So what's going on in AI in medicine? This just came out a week ago. The large-scale assessment of smartwatch to identify atrial fibrillation. How many people here actually saw the study or heard about it? It was actually in the press quite a bit, right? So Apple Watch, just to give you a comparison, when I was at Stanford, I learned that it took the Stanford Cardiology Group about 10 years to get 10,000 patients entered in a hypertension study. And during the year that I was in school, it took Apple for the same 10,000 patients. How much time do you think was needed to recruit 10,000 patients for the Apple blood pressure study? It was less than a day. I mean, everything is just magnitudes easier and faster. So close to 500,000 patients were studied here with a positive predictive value in the 80s, 90s. And so useful, but being a cardiologist, I can tell you that I get plenty of false positive readings from my patients. So still, I think more work needs to be done. But the important thing here is to understand that the whole wearable technology world has changed, especially once it gets coupled with AI. It's going to change how, 1 out of 3 of us are going to develop atrial fibrillation. And most of the time, you're not aware of it. So I know a few faces woke up with that. But it's going to be fairly common that we actually have appropriate diagnosis. I can tell you, just on a personal note, I had a medical journey recently into the cardiac world, as a few of you know. And it was my pocket EKG, portable EKG detector that actually made me suspicious something significant was happening. So, and that's going to be the world for us in the future, is not just you being clinicians. How many people here are clinicians? So most of you. So it's not just for yourself, but for your patients to have that capability to not have to go to the emergency room or urgent care center for their EKG or chest x-ray is going to be how we practice in the future. So I know there are surgeons here. So this came out of New York Times just this past week about a much, much faster and efficient and more accurate way of looking at pathology off of biopsy. So this is published in Nature, by the way, if you want to read the nuances of the article. So images being gathered, acquired, and just fed into a deep learning that we just talked about, deep learning algorithm, and quickly within 100 seconds, it will tell you what the probability is of certain diagnoses. Even with a good pathology lab, as the surgeons in the room know, sometimes it takes a few hours even to have a diagnosis, and this is prediction with probabilities built in. So, and also picking up new diagnoses. So this is, as Bill Gibson says, the future is already here, just not evenly distributed. So this may be news to some of you, but this is already ongoing in a few centers. Just a few words about history of AI. It tends to parallel how computers beat humans in different games. This, as some of you may remember, Boris Spassky, Garry Kasparov was defeated by the IBM supercomputer, although he goes around the country and says, actually won the first match. But no one cared about that. Everyone just cared about the fact that the supercomputer actually beat a human. And as you know, Jeopardy was defeated. The champions in Jeopardy was defeated by IBM Watson. And then recently, the game Go was conquered by the computer as well, which is way ahead of schedule. Now, some of you are Jeopardy fans like I am, know that the 3 human champions came together for like the ultimate tournament. But I almost wanted to write Alex Trebek. Where's Watson in the middle of all this? I mean, why are we excluding the real champion at the I think in Jeopardy? So just a little bit of human hubris, I think. The best and simplest definition of artificial intelligence, just to come back to the definition, is Marvin Minsky, the MIT computer scientist, says it's the science of making machines do things that would require intelligence if done by humans. I can't say men these days, but humans. And I think that's a very, very good definition. Does anyone know who actually came up with the term artificial intelligence first and what year?
John McCarthy?
John McCarthy is correct. What year? Hasn't been that long since we actually have the term. 1955, the year before the Dartmouth conference that really sort of collected mathematicians, computer scientists, and really seriously thinking about artificial intelligence. So if you want to keep artificial intelligence simple, this is how I look at artificial intelligence before we go into the whole portfolio. So it's assisted. So unfortunately, the 3 descriptors all start with an A. So assisted is, think about the iRoomba vacuum cleaner that goes around your house programmed. You don't have to interact with it. It just does its job. In healthcare, there are robots now that actually do perform certain functions like blood work from the beginning to the end, including pushing the data out to the electronic record. The augmented intelligence is what's happening now. Everything you hear about in AI medicine is pretty much in this category. And that's where humans and machines are being collaborative and working together. IBM Watson for oncology is an example of that at MSK. Despite the slightly negative publicity, I think actually that whole cognitive area is going to be huge this coming decade. That's just a personal prediction. Because I do see, I think there's way too much focus on machine learning and deep learning and not nearly enough on all the other aspects of artificial intelligence. And that's why when I wrote the book on AI in medicine, I intentionally did not include the words machine learning in the title of the book because I think that's going to be, that has reached its high point. And then lastly, autonomous AI is already here in medicine. Most people don't know that. There is essentially decisions are made by the machines independently of human clinicians. And there's an retinal image interpretation software out of University of Iowa called IDXDR that is entirely autonomous without human ophthalmologists needing to be involved. And think about the implications of global health. It's going to be huge for some of the retinal diseases. So where are we today? We are narrow task-focused AI. So the game Go, chess, Jeopardy, these are very narrow tasks if you think about it. So no computer is as smart as a human in terms of doing everything. But I think we'll see that in our lifetime. But we are at the sort of the beginning stages of seeing computers that can do a lot of different things. One example is a game-playing computer that can play different games, but with the same algorithm. So we are starting to see evidence of that. So this is how artificial intelligence relates to machine learning. So machine learning is under the umbrella of artificial intelligence. Deep learning, again, is a type of machine learning that's very, very sophisticated. We're starting to see computer science, data science, and mathematics converging to yield artificial intelligence. In case you didn't get this picture, it's in the book that's coming out in 2 to 4 weeks. So someone challenged me with putting artificial intelligence on one slide, so here it is. We're talking about robotics and autonomous systems, which are more machine-like, and then there's more human-like areas that I put in sort of the flesh pink. Cognitive computing is basically mimicking how humans think. Natural language processing is going to be huge in healthcare, but vastly under-leveraged. This is allowing the computers to think and write and speak like humans. You're starting to see that with chatbots and virtual assistants. Classical machine learning is basically very souped up statistics, and it's going to help also a great deal with relieving the administrative burden that we have in the healthcare system. So when I do consults for hospitals with our team, one of the first things we talk about is get robotic process automation into the hospitals, because it's basically going to relieve up to 50, if not more, % of the human burden of doing administrative tasks. So anything that's repetitive can be duplicated with AI. And lastly, the deep learning area that's getting a lot of press, perhaps has not penetrated into the medical arena, is deep reinforcement learning, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. Deep reinforcement learning is going to be a deal maker in medicine. So all the tough decisions that have very, very short timelines are going to be extremely, I think, good to have reinforcement learning, particularly deep reinforcement learning. I'm just going to mention also convolutional neural network, or CNN. If you can't remember what it does, just remember the television news station. It's image focused. So CNN is particularly good at using deep learning for image interpretation. So the short video clip that I showed in the operating room, that's all deep learning in the form of CNN. So this is deep reinforcement learning I just talked about. I think with the PowerPoint transition, I lost the ability to blow this up. But essentially, when DeepMind, that is now required by Google, was able to defeat the human champions in the game Go, how many people here know that happened a couple of years ago? OK, so good, because it used to be like no hands would go up. So that allowed clinicians to think about how to adopt this amazing way of doing machine intelligence in the clinical realm. So now it's being, now we're seeing publications. This is my good friend Matthew Komorowski applied it to a clinical sepsis model in the ICU setting, where you're sort of gaming to your advantage and comparing it to clinicians. And of course, no surprise that the model handily beat the human clinicians in making the right decision. The outcome is mortality. And we're going to start seeing that. It's not going to replace the clinicians in the ICU setting or the operating room. It's just going to augment your intelligence. Although I personally don't like the term augmented intelligence as being sort of offered as a way to perhaps make AI a little bit more accepted in medicine. I think it's just a misnomer. So I think we ought to just stick with artificial intelligence and understand it. So this is CNN, which is what I just talked about. Used to be dozens of layers, but now it's hundreds of layers, and probably in the future thousands of layers of filters that will deconstruct any medical image and make an accurate prediction what it might be. So I see this as a huge contributor in the future of medicine, particularly in image-intensive fields like radiology, cardiology. I'm a cardiologist, so we're looking at ways of having a more automated way of looking at echocardiograms, for instance, which is just moving images, but I think it's going to be a huge plus for medical images. I talked about cognitive computing. This is cognitive computing on one slide. Basically, it's a small portfolio of related AI tools that includes machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing. This natural language processing was the thing that enabled Watson to really take on the human champions. Because we had machine learning already and even deep learning, but it was the natural language processing part that allowed it to be more human, right? I mean, the smartest computer is still not human unless you put elements to make it work. And this is sort of the schematic of IBM Watson. I know a few of you are actually involved with these projects, but it's a very, very impressive array of AI tools put together. So think of cognitive computing as a string ensemble in the orchestra of AI. Again, natural language processing, I used to not talk about it because no one cared or no one knew what it was, but I think it's becoming more and more relevant. Natural language processing is now evolving into understanding and generation. So natural language processing has come a long way in terms of computers understanding humans and vice versa in the last 2 or 3 years particularly. So that's going to translate into a large input of this tool into the medical arena. Here you see natural language processing taking structured data. Again, most of medical data is not structured, but taking structured data and basically translating into something that machines can understand. And once we get medical data more structured and more complete, I think the dividend's going to be even bigger than we think right now for AI. Again, we are here where the hype is exceeding capability, but I'm predicting that 10 years from now, when we come to this meeting and talk about AI, you will remember back 10 years and say, wow, Anthony Chang was talking about such basic things, and yet we're doing so many more sophisticated things than he talked about, which I think which will happen. I think 10 years from now, we'll appreciate that we underestimated the impact of AI in medicine. Everyone's thinking we're hyping it, but 10 years from now, we'll be saying the opposite. Like some of the tech people would say, right? You're always underestimating the impact long term, but overestimating in the short term. So just a few examples of AI in medicine, the 3 big areas: decision support and hospital monitoring. Again, at our hospital, we're using real-time analytics to hopefully predict an adverse event and definitely avoiding an adverse outcome as early as possible. So that's already being done, and I think that's going to be a huge help for particularly ICUs. Although it gets a little bit controversial because one of the Boston hospitals was using it as an exact way of predicting what your chances of dying on any given day in the ICU. So I think that sort of brought forth all kinds of ethical debates. Does anyone really want to or need to know that your chance of dying that day is 93%? You know, I think it's very, very difficult. Another big area is medical imaging, as I alluded to earlier. This is the Stanford group, which is the group that's really pushed this area, looking at chest x-rays and predicting pneumonia with heat maps to help them make the diagnosis. Now, to be fair, these studies did bring out quite a few fair criticisms, but I think the technique is getting better and better. Now, if you look at this, you know that it's alternating, it's a matrix of alternating chihuahuas and blueberry muffins. And if you can't tell which is which, we'll have to talk. But deep learning has had some difficulty in relating to flat photographs in a 3-dimensional construct or framework. So that's its Achilles heel. And although that's being conquered now by Google, so I'm just saying this is not a criticism of deep learning, this is just giving an example. Humans still have a role in AI in medicine. So, but deep learning was only about 70% accurate in predicting which is which. So I put my 4-year-old to the task without much prompting. Some of you noticed I'm already teaching her how to play the game Go. She was 7 for 7 without any prompting or sort of telling her the differences. So something very special about how a human child learns. And that's the biggest now educational as well as research area in AI and medicine, because I think in the next few years, the machine learning, deep learning hype and sort of paradigm will be fading. Apologies to Payush, who gave a talk on machine learning today. It's all going to come back to cognition, intuition, the more sophisticated human elements that we do that is not yet being done by machines. So that's a hot area for research. And then precision medicine, as some of you are involved in, is basically taking layered information and being able to predict. And the exciting part is just recently, the first AI-derived medicines have become reality. So imagine your future cancer therapy or cardiac therapy will be entirely tailored to your individual needs, which, even as a medical student, never made sense to me why everyone's on the same medication at the same dose, right? So that's going to change in our lifetime. Again, the important thing is, though, even if you don't program and you don't know much about AI, you can help the whole sort of movement by focusing on the data part, which is often the part that's missing or inaccurate in this data intelligence continuum. So just like Apollo 11, we had only 3 astronauts land, or actually 2 astronauts land on the moon, but there was, I don't know if you know this, but there was over 1 million people involved with that project in one way or another. So a lot more people need to be involved with just the data part and not just focus on the AI part. So a friend of mine, Todd Ponsky, who was a pediatric surgeon, and I were talking about incorporating machine learning, deep learning, and cognitive computing in the form of Watson for mentoring young surgeons. And he actually made a little video clip to show me, and here it is. I don't know if we're going to have sound, but it doesn't look like we're going to have sound, in the back. So essentially, Watson is looking at the medical images, figuring out what the anatomic landmarks are, recommending where the incision should be made, and following along with the perhaps junior surgeon or surgeon that hasn't had training in this particular procedure. I'm sorry the sound wasn't there, but essentially Watson was coaching. So that telementoring in the future, I think, within a decade, will be very different than actually humans getting on to the scene, but it'll be actually partly augmented by computers as well. One of the things that we're already starting to see is what I always say, the best combination is actually human and machine, not human versus machine. We're starting to see papers focusing on human-machine synergy rather than comparing humans to machines, which never made sense to me. So this is a wonderful paper looking at what we call swarm intelligence, so a lot of humans and a machine together, and really proved to have superior performance when that's the case. So swarm intelligence is going to be yet another hot area in AI medicine. So how do you get all the human clinicians that are seasoned together? And I even heard discussions this morning about not being able to take advantage of all the seasoned clinicians' wisdom, and once they retire, it sort of just kind of fades away, and it shouldn't be that way. So one of the things I always, since this is a meeting about entrepreneurship as well, is I always coach our young interns and younger trainees to think about how to be as far away from your comfort zone as possible. So this is your comfort zone, which most of us like to be in, and there's the fear zone, which you're starting to be a little bit more nervous, learning zone, which you're actually acquiring a lot of new skills, but you're definitely way out of your comfort zone, and then the growth zone, which I felt like I was in when I was at Stanford, working with people third to half my age who are a lot smarter than I was in artificial intelligence. I think that's where you really have the biggest dividend. And I think just to give a real-life example, a couple of months ago, I had the pleasure of, when I was in Boston for an AI meeting, I invited my former anatomy mentor, Dr. Richard Van Praagh, and he's 96 years old, and he's reconsidering his widely espoused theory of congenital heart disease because he felt like it was inadequate. And he's learning complexity theory and mathematics at the age of 96 to rethink his own theory. So just to give an example that learning should not stop once you finish your training. And also, the farther you are from your comfort zone, the bigger the dividend, with I think very few exceptions. So human intelligence plus machine intelligence, I think, gives you medical intelligence or surgical intelligence if you're a surgeon. So this is a great example. I had the pleasure of co-chairing a meeting where we paired up 100 clinicians with no data science background and 100 data scientists from a local university. This took place in Beijing. And they all, in individual groups, came up with their own research question, were able to answer it with a live database without any reliance on existing publications, and presented the abstracts. So they worked, it was sort of we call it the Datathon rather than a hackathon. And I think this is how medicine should be practiced in the future. To have, I call this Dr. Watson and Sherlock Holmes, that every doctor should have a Sherlock Holmes as a partner to really think how they practice and think about how they do things. And try not to miss the AI arc that's leaving. Again, SQ is status quo. Somebody said, what is SQ? And since we're at an entrepreneurial meeting, I wanted to just say this is only some of the US companies that's AI in healthcare. And the most common question I get is, how do you sort these companies out? Which is better or which is not as good? And this is sort of my personal proposal is to, and this is kind of like thinking and acting like a data scientist, is you deconstruct everything into several categories and several elements. So I think obviously the technology or the machine part is very important. So I sort of think about the data and the access to data, which is very important in healthcare. The science, the data science that's involved, and the analytics level. What's the barrier to entry, and also the cybersecurity aspect. And then I have a category where both technology and humans are involved. So that's the team and the background, what kind of work they've done, as well as the relevance and the prevalence of the healthcare problem. So you can have the best data science team with doing the best data science, but a totally clinically irrelevant problem, then it's still, that company still won't thrive. And unfortunately, I see way too much of that. The third category is the business side of things. So that's the perhaps the MBA in me thinking about strategy and your competition, the finances, and what's the likelihood you're going to be around in the next year or two. The timing and the market. Bill Gross said the most important thing of all the things that he looked at in a company's survival, and most people say it's the team or the competition, is actually timing. Timing is the most important thing. And then execution, and lastly, there are a lot of intangibles that I throw on the list too. So I actually score companies in this fashion. I sort of look at the human aspects, the machine aspects, as well as the both aspects, and give you a spider diagram of how the company is doing. So again, I think it's good to have data science about the data science companies. And we kind of score them in a certain category. No one wants to say they're bad at AI, so I just say they're AI nascent, AI aware, sort of like embryonic stages here. So it's suffice to say there's only maybe 2 or 3 companies in the AI-enabled category. So most of the companies reside on AI-ready or AI-aware. So a lot of work that still needs to be done with companies as well as hospitals and professional schools. So I heard discussion about educating a medical student. And the thing is that I had the privilege of speaking in front of the medical school deans last year about the future of medical education. The problem is they don't know where they are in the AI technology entrepreneurial part of the curriculum. They know that it's probably almost non-existent, but they kind of need to be reminded where they are before they, I think, embark on a change in the medical education. So takeaways, I think artificial intelligence is not just about robots or machine learning, but a robust portfolio of tools. Again, artificial intelligence, I think we're still underestimating the impact today in 2019. 2029, we're going to be looking back and say we just didn't appreciate what it could do. But we all have to roll up our sleeves and do some work. So those of you who are seasoned clinicians who don't think they're going to contribute to AI, I think I'd just like to encourage you to get into the game, and you can contribute something that a data scientist will not have, which is clinical wisdom. And I think a scoring tool can be very helpful to figure out where you are. If you are a company, ask someone to assess your company in a very objective way. If you're planning on investing in companies, you should definitely do that. If you're a hospital-based practitioner, you should think about your hospital. We have a scoring tool for hospitals too. Think about where you are before you just sort of buy the latest and greatest AI tool that you saw at HIMSS or at another meeting, which is unfortunately, what most people are doing. You really have to think where you are before you embark on an investment. And also, I'm very excited about working with a few medical schools to really bring not just AI, but also advanced technologies and also innovation and entrepreneurship to the medical schools that we so badly need in the US. I think with that, just a few references. I get asked a lot about, well, where should I start? What book should I get? These are the top books of the last 3 years in my mind, my personal humble opinion. Machine Platform Crowd really kind of launched the public understanding of AI. Predicting Machine is actually good because it actually has a lot of healthcare examples, particularly in radiology. And if you're particularly in a leadership position, Digital Transformation by Thomas Siebel is a must-read. It just talks about advanced technologies in all sectors. And if you're also in a leadership position, the AI Power Organization from HBR is critical. It talks about, and it's totally, the punchline unfortunately is on the cover. So it says it's really not about technology. Most organizations fail at even preliminary stage of AI adoption because they didn't take enough time to change the culture. So you have to work on people, which is ironic because we're talking about machine intelligence, yet everything about people is what drives that agenda as well as understand it. And we have a website that has a lot of good resources for you thanks to the donation by the granddaughter of Walt Disney. So I have an ebook that's uploaded, it's free. It became a bona fide book. And this will be out next month in February by Elsevier. There's also a journal. For those of you who are interested in going to the next level, actually publishing your work, please send work to this journal, the chief editor, and also a lot of talks from previous years uploaded. We just wrapped IMed 19, which is our big flagship meeting every year. It's going to be in California every year. We're actually thinking about moving into the Bay Area very soon. We had close to 600 people this year, so it's about 40% clinicians, 60% everyone else. It's a very, very good meeting for networking, especially if you're in the space and just become familiar with it. So we're announcing the dates for the 2020 meeting. It's going to be December 9th to the 12th. And if you mention you were part of the Global Summit meeting and punch in the discount code is 007, you'll get a good discount. Now, by the way, someone's a surgeon and asked me, well, I'm a surgeon. What do I do if I want to hear about surgery? We actually have clinician series throughout the year that covers subspecialties, and we go to about 5 different regions around the world. I want to thank my mentors at Stanford, and here's my contact information if you need it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.